I buried my husband. Then I saw him holding hands with my best friend. I buried my husband 3 years ago. 3 years later, I watched him walk down the street holding hands with my best friend. At least, that's how the nightmare began. 3 years earlier, I stood beside a black casket while rain poured from the sky. Family members cried. Friends cried. Even strangers cried. And I cried harder than anyone. Because inside that casket was supposed to be the man I loved more than anything. Marcus Jackson. My husband. My best friend. The man I believed I would spend the rest of my life with. I remember staring at his photograph beside the casket and wondering how life could possibly continue. One moment we were planning our future, talking about vacations, talking about retirement, talking about children. The next, I was signing funeral paperwork. The official story was simple: a boating accident. Marcus had gone out alone. The boat was found damaged. Search teams spent days looking for him. Weeks later, authorities informed me that remains had been recovered and identified. The case was closed. The funeral was held. And just like that, my husband was gone. Or so I believed. What I didn't know was that while I was standing beside that casket, crying until I could barely breathe, Marcus Jackson was still alive. But before I tell you how I discovered that, you need to understand who Danielle Brooks was. Because this story isn't just about a husband who betrayed me. It's about two people I trusted more than anyone. Marcus was my husband. Danielle was my best friend. And for years, I would have trusted either of them with my life. I met Danielle long before she became an executive at my company. She wasn't an employee when we first met. She was simply a friend. The kind of friend every woman hopes to find once in her life. She celebrated my victories, comforted me during my failures, remembered my birthday every year, showed up whenever I needed her. When my mother passed away, Danielle was there. When I got engaged to Marcus, Danielle was there. When I walked down the aisle on my wedding day, Danielle was there. She wasn't just my friend. She felt like family. Years later, when Jackson Transport Group began expanding rapidly, I needed someone I could trust to help manage the financial side of the company. Someone smart, someone loyal, someone I believed would always protect the business. Without hesitation, I chose Danielle. She started in a senior financial role. Within a few years, she became Chief Financial Officer, my CFO, the woman responsible for overseeing every dollar that entered or left the company my grandfather built from nothing. Looking back now, I practically handed her the keys. And because she was my best friend, I never questioned a thing. Not once. Marcus loved her. I loved her. My employees respected her. She became one of the most trusted people in the entire company. The three of us spent countless hours together. Business meetings, holiday parties, family dinners, weekend getaways. If someone had told me back then that Marcus and Danielle were secretly destroying my life together, I would have laughed in their face. Because that's how completely they fooled me. For nearly 8 years, everything appeared perfect. The company was thriving. Revenue increased every year. New contracts were pouring in. Employees were getting paid. Taxes were filed. Audits came and went. Nothing seemed wrong. Absolutely nothing. Then came the boating accident, the funeral, the grief, the endless nights of loneliness. And during the darkest period of my life, Danielle became my biggest source of support. She called every day, checked on me constantly, brought food to my house, helped me handle company decisions when I could barely get out of bed. Sometimes she sat with me for hours while I cried. There were moments when I honestly don't know how I would have survived without her. Imagine that. The woman helping me survive my husband's death was secretly helping him disappear. 3 years passed. Slowly. Life moved forward. I focused on work, expanded the company, signed new contracts, rebuilt myself. The pain never completely disappeared, but eventually, I learned how to live with it. Then one ordinary afternoon changed everything. I was in another city meeting potential clients. Nothing unusual, nothing special. After the meeting ended, I stopped at a coffee shop, ordered a drink, sat near the window, and looked outside. That's when I saw him. At first, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. It couldn't be him. It was impossible. My husband was dead. I buried him. I watched them lower his casket into the ground. But there he was, walking down the street. Alive. Marcus Jackson. Not only was he alive, he was smiling, laughing, holding hands with a woman. And that woman was Danielle Brooks, my best friend. The woman I trusted more than anyone. The woman who held me while I cried at my husband's funeral. The woman who promised everything would be okay. I remember dropping my coffee. I remember my hands shaking. I remember struggling to breathe. Because in that moment, my entire world shattered for the second time. I don't remember leaving the coffee shop. I don't remember getting back to my hotel. Honestly, I don't remember much of anything from the rest of that day. My mind kept replaying the same image. Marcus, alive, holding Danielle's hand, smiling, like none of the last 3 years had ever happened, like my grief had never existed, like my pain meant nothing. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, walking together, laughing together, living a life that was supposed to be impossible. The next morning, I convinced myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe I was mistaken. Maybe the man only looked like Marcus. Maybe grief had distorted what I saw. Maybe I wanted answers so badly that my mind had created them. But deep down, I already knew the truth. I knew Marcus. I knew the way he walked, the way he smiled, the way he tilted his head when he laughed. I hadn't imagined anything. The man I buried was alive. The woman beside him was my best friend. And somehow, nobody believed me. Not my family, not my friends, not even some of my own employees. Most people thought grief had finally caught up with me. A few suggested therapy. Others gently told me to take some time away from work. One person actually said, "Maybe you're having trouble letting Marcus go." That one nearly broke me because I wasn't struggling to let Marcus go. I was struggling to understand how a dead man could be walking around downtown holding hands with my best friend. For weeks, I questioned myself. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe everyone else was right. Maybe I was losing my mind. Then Danielle called me, a normal phone call. At least that's what she thought. She asked how I was doing, asked how business was going, asked if I needed anything. And while she was talking, I realized something. She sounded completely normal, completely relaxed, completely comfortable, as if she had absolutely nothing to hide. That terrified me, because guilty people usually act nervous. Danielle didn't. She sounded like someone who believed she had gotten away with everything. The moment I hung up, I made a decision. I needed proof. Not suspicions, not theories, proof. So I hired a private investigator. I didn't tell anyone. Not my family, not my executives, not even my attorney. The fewer people who knew, the better. At first, the investigator focused on one simple question. Was Marcus Jackson alive? Honestly, I expected the search to take months, maybe years. Instead, it took less than 3 weeks. One afternoon, my phone rang. The investigator's voice sounded different, serious, careful, almost nervous. Monica, I think you need to come see this. The moment I walked into his office, I knew something was wrong. Photographs covered the desk, dozens of them. Marcus entering restaurants, Marcus leaving hotels, Marcus shopping, Marcus driving luxury vehicles, Marcus laughing, Marcus smiling, Marcus living. For a moment, I couldn't breathe because every photograph proved the impossible. Marcus Jackson wasn't dead. He had never been dead. For 3 years, while I mourned him, while I rebuilt my life, while I cried myself to sleep, Marcus had been living freely. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was who appeared beside him. In photograph after photograph, in restaurant after restaurant, in city after city, Danielle Brooks, my best friend, my confidant, my chief financial officer, the woman I trusted with everything. The investigator watched me stare at the photographs. Then he asked a question. One simple question. A question that changed everything. If Marcus faked his death, what was the reason? At first, I thought the answer was obvious. An affair. They wanted to be together. They wanted a fresh start. It was disgusting, but it made sense. Then the investigator shook his head. No. He slid another photograph across the desk. Luxury vehicles, designer clothing, private events, expensive vacations, a lifestyle neither of them should have been able to afford. Then he asked another question. Where did the money come from? That question led us straight into the company records. Weeks turned into months. At first, we found nothing. Everything looked normal. Then the patterns started appearing. The same vendors, the same approvals, the same payment routes. Again and again and again. Thousands of transactions, spread across nearly 8 years. Never large enough to attract attention. Never obvious enough to trigger alarms. They weren't stealing millions all at once. They were stealing thousands at a time. Patiently, carefully, year after year. Then we discovered something chilling. Every suspicious payment ended during the exact same week. The week Marcus supposedly died. The fraud stopped immediately, as if someone had flipped a switch. Suddenly I understood. They weren't stealing after the funeral. They didn't need to. By then, they already had everything they came for. The deeper we dug, the uglier it became. One shell company became 3. 3 became 6. 6 became 10. Layers upon layers designed to hide the truth. Then we found her. Danielle Brooks, my best friend. Her name appeared on ownership records connected to one of the shell companies. The signatures matched. The addresses matched. The records matched. The woman who held me while I cried at my husband's funeral had been helping him rob me for years. The investigator estimated they had stolen millions. Not overnight, not in one transaction, but slowly, over nearly a decade. The 2 people I trusted most had spent years building an escape plan, and I helped fund every step of it. Then the investigator finally found the address, the place where Marcus and Danielle had been living. A mansion, hidden inside one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the state. That night, I drove there myself. I parked across the street and waited for almost 2 hours. I watched through those enormous windows. Marcus and Danielle were inside, laughing, drinking wine, living the life they stole, the life they built with my money. And that's when I made a decision. I was done watching. I was done crying. I was done being their victim. I walked to the front door and knocked. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus Jackson looked terrified. The color drained from his face. Danielle froze beside him. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. For a few seconds, we simply stared at one another. 3 people, bound together by lies. Finally, Marcus spoke. "Monica." I laughed. Not because anything was funny, because after everything they had done, hearing him say my name felt ridiculous, almost insulting. 3 years. 3 years of grief. 3 years of lies. 3 years of believing I was a widow. And now he wanted to talk. I stepped inside the mansion. Neither of them stopped me. Neither of them could. I looked around slowly. The marble floors, the expensive artwork, the designer furniture, the grand staircase. Every inch of that house represented betrayal. Every room represented a lie. Then I looked directly at Danielle and asked the only question that mattered. "How long?" Danielle couldn't answer. She looked down at the floor. Marcus answered instead. "Almost 10 years. 10 years. My marriage hadn't been destroyed by an affair. My marriage had been alive from the beginning." Then Marcus said something I'll never forget. "Danielle and I were together before I met you." Suddenly everything made sense. The introductions, the friendship, the hiring process, the promotion. None of it had happened by accident. The entire relationship, the entire marriage, the entire plan, everything had been designed around one goal: my company, my inheritance, my money. Then Marcus smiled, and that terrified me, because people aren't supposed to smile when their lives are falling apart. But Marcus wasn't finished. "There's still something you don't know." My stomach dropped. What could possibly be worse? Then he said it. "I attended my own funeral." The room went silent. I felt my heart stop. "No." Marcus nodded. "Yes." I shook my head. "You're lying." But for the first time all night, Marcus was telling the truth. I stood behind the trees and watched. I remembered that day instantly. The rain, the casket, the flowers, the pain, the grief, and somewhere nearby, Marcus had been watching me cry, watching me collapse, watching me say goodbye, like it was entertainment. Then he said something even worse, something so cruel I still struggle to understand. "I wanted to see if you would cry." Everything disappeared, because in that moment, I realized Marcus Jackson wasn't just a liar. He wasn't just a thief. He wasn't just a con artist. He was a monster. What Marcus didn't know was that while he was confessing, police officers were already on their way. Before I arrived at the mansion, the investigator had submitted everything: the financial records, the shell companies, the ownership documents, the evidence, all of it. The knock at the door came less than 10 minutes later. Marcus knew immediately. So did Danielle. The game was over. When the officers entered, nobody resisted. There was nowhere left to run. No more lies. No more hiding. No more pretending to be dead. I watched as police escorted Marcus and Danielle out of the mansion, the same mansion my money had helped build. For the first time in years, Marcus looked exactly how he should have looked: defeated. The next several months were filled with investigations, court hearings, financial audits, recovery efforts. It wasn't easy. Some of the money was gone forever, but not all of it. Investigators recovered assets, properties, accounts, investments. Slowly, piece by piece, I started taking my life back. And one morning, several months later, I found myself standing inside my office, looking out over the city skyline. The same company, the same headquarters, the same business my grandfather built. But something had changed. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about Marcus. I wasn't thinking about Danielle. I wasn't thinking about betrayal. I was thinking about the future. Because despite everything they stole, they failed to take the one thing that mattered most: me. They stole money. They stole years. They stole trust. But they didn't steal my strength. Marcus lost his freedom. Danielle lost everything she spent 10 years helping him steal. And me? I got my life back.